Okay. Hey guys, welcome to chapel today. If you do not know me already, my name is Reagan. I'm a first year and I'm studying youth ministry, which is why I'm sitting like this and not actually preaching at you, because I think that's stupid and I don't like doing that. Because here's my thing. I want to spend my life like hanging out with like 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, and I don't really want to preach at them. I want to talk to them about Jesus, which is exactly what I want to do to you today. With you today, not to you. Anyway, before we start, I just kind of want to pray open because, as you could probably tell, I'm a little nervous. I don't really talk to very large groups of people all the time. So if you can, bow your heads with me and pray. Dear God, I want to thank you for this day. I want to thank you for the word that I get to teach from. I want to thank you that it reveals so many things about you. And God, I pray that my words represent you in content and tone and in emphasis. Whatever you desire me to say, Lord, just allow me to say it. And whatever you desire me to cut out, allow me to cut out. In your name, amen. Okay, so as you may have deduced from the sign-up sheet, we are doing a deep dive in 2 Gospels, actually, Luke and Mark, both of which I think are very interesting. I'm actually studying Luke by myself right now, like in my own personal Bible studies, and I came across this story of the bleeding woman. And guys, when I tell you that I reread this story for probably like a month or 2 because it just gripped my soul in a way that I did not understand. I don't know, man. But we are going to do like a very, very deep dive into Luke and Mark, and we're also going to talk a little bit about Levitical law, and we're going to go into James a little bit too. So it's kind of a little scattered, but like one topic, if that makes sense. But essentially, interesting. Anyway, the vibe for today is talking about this woman, her struggle, and how she got there, and why it glorifies God. So, to start off, when I was in middle school, like I said, I'm a youth ministry major, so middle schoolers are very important to me. I wanted to go absolutely unnoticed. I didn't want people to notice anything about me. I dressed in all black. I didn't wear like fun colors. I was just nervous about people knowing who I was, seeing who I was besides just the surface level. I don't know if any of you relate to that, but that was what I was in middle school. And as you can see, I'm a little bit different now. Still wearing black sometimes, but you know, good stuff. I just found that it was easier to be ignored than to be the center of attention because I didn't want people to notice me or see me or anything like that. Hi, Isaiah. The reason I bring this up is because our focus today is on the bleeding woman. If you guys want to open your Bibles, you can, but if you don't, that's also cool. We're going to start in Luke 8, verses 42 through 48 specifically. Now, for a little bit of context, this woman was not originally part of Jesus's goal for that day, if that makes sense. Like, he was on his way to heal the official's daughter, an official named Jairus. This guy came to Jesus and was like, hey, my daughter's sick, I need help. And so Jesus was on his way to heal her, but found this woman instead, which I just think is interesting because she wasn't like the main goal. But verse 42, the latter part of it says, as Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him, and a woman who was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, but no one could heal her. She came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. Who touched me? Jesus asked. When all denied it, Peter said, Master, the people are crowding and pressing against you. But Jesus said, someone touched me. I know that the power has gone out from me. Then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet. In the presence of all the people, she told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. Then he said to her, Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace. So that's the word of the Lord. Something that I find very interesting about this woman is that she doesn't have a name, which happens quite frequently in the Bible. If you look at women in biblical history, they either usually are known as like this person's wife, this person's daughter, or just like a woman in general. So she did not have a name, but her story is told in not 1, but 2 Gospels, which is interesting, right? Because that kind of means it's a point of emphasis, something important happened. She had a condition that caused her to bleed for 12 years. And in both recollections of it, Luke, which we read, and Mark, which we did not read, the Bible tells us that she tried everything that she could to fix it. But that was just how she was. The doctors couldn't do anything for her. They had tried extensively but could not heal her in the way that she wanted to be healed. So in that day, that meant that she was conditioned to be forgotten because of the Levitical law that they lived by at the time, which is, like I said, we're going to study that a little bit. If you turn in Leviticus to chapter 15, verse 25 is the one that we're going to talk about specifically. It says, when a woman has a discharge of blood for many days at a time, other than her monthly period, or has a discharge that continues to be beyond her period, she will be unclean as long as the discharge, just as in the days of her period. So, essentially, back in that time, the law that they lived by was the Levitical law, the Mosaic law, that original covenant. That's something that I think is very important to touch on because her identity in that day would have been unclean. Nobody would have wanted to touch her because that would make them unclean. Nobody would have wanted to touch the things that she sat on or the clothes that she wore because that would make them unclean, and they would be unable to go into the temple and worship. But this woman who bled for every day for 12 years was unclean. She was unable to worship in her place of worship, and she was ostracized by people because she was unclean. There's really no other better way for me to say it than what the Bible says. What we didn't read in verse 26, it says that any bed she lies on or anything that she sits on will be unclean or untouchable. And so that there were things that she could not do or participate in. At this time, the teachers of the law would have taught that all suffering came from sin, so they would have said this suffering that she experienced would have come from a sin that either she committed or that her parents had committed, and that essentially it was her fault that she was struggling with this affliction. And she obviously yearned for healing because for 12 years of her life she was unable to worship God in her place of worship. She was unable to touch people. So imagine going without physical contact with other people for 12 years. I'd be giving high fives, she just could not. And it is just tragic to me because her identity was this affliction that she suffered from. In verse 28 in Mark, he kind of gives us a look into her mind, so I'm actually going to read that version of it really quick too. This is Mark 5, verses 25 through 34. It says, a large crowd followed and pressed against him, which we know. A woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet, instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, my body will be healed. Now, that's something that I want to focus on. She did not come, to Jesus in front of him. If you're standing in a crowd, she came behind him. She did not want him to see her. She did not want anybody to see her because she was labeled as unclean, untouchable. She wanted to go unnoticed, just like I talked about earlier. And she, if you think about, that amount of faith, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. And then in Luke, it said, she touched the edge of his cloak. That's something that I was stuck on for probably 2 weeks. This woman touched the edge of his cloak. That's I'm wearing a cardigan today. I actually didn't do this on purpose. But look at this little corner of my cardigan, right? If she touched just that little corner, and then her affliction suddenly stopped. This was something that she had suffered with for 12 years. That's a long time. I've been alive for, how long have I been alive? 19 years. I forget sometimes. So that's I can't do math, but a lot of my life would have been spent suffering like that. She would have, I don't know, it just it bugs me in a great way. It itches my brain, you know what I'm saying? She touched the edge of his cloak, and this affliction that she had suffered with for 12 years disappeared. She just stopped bleeding. She was touchable again. She was identifiable again, not by her affliction, but by her name, which we don't know, but I'm sure Jesus did. Essentially, Jesus was her last hope. The Bible says she spent every last cent she had on doctors, on people that should have healed her, but they couldn't. She had lost everything to this affliction. Her identity, her money, her just everything. Her ability to be a human, essentially, was stripped from her because of this affliction. And she had such faith that she said, if I touch his clothes, I will be healed. And she was healed immediately. And then Jesus asked a question, who touched me? Now, when I first read that, I was like, why is he asking? Like, wouldn't he know? Because Jesus knows everything, as we are aware. Like, he knows everything that's on our hearts, everything that's in our minds. But I always questioned why he asked that. Because, like the disciples pointed out, he's in a crowd. Like, people are going to touch you if you're, like, being crowded. Like, you guys have been in a crowd. You've probably been to a concert, right? If you go, they're crowded. There's lots of people. You basically just get shoved around. This is what was happening to Jesus. Everybody knew who he was, and they expected him to heal people. So they crowded around him like you would, like, I don't know, say, like, Young Gravy, your favorite artist. Dude, I love him. He's so sick. Anyway, the disciples pointed out that, like, people were around him. He was going to get touched. He was going to get, like, prodded, pushed, like, moved. But he asked again. But he didn't ask because he didn't know. Because, like I said, Jesus knows. He knows everything. He didn't ask because he didn't know. He asked because he wanted her to own up to it. In both versions, both Luke and Mark, it said she was scared of what would have been done to her. She took a big risk by reaching out the way that she did. She touched Jesus, which is, like, number one, she's a woman. Girl, don't be touching people without their consent. Number two, especially a man. No, not allowed. Number two, she was untouchable. She couldn't touch people because they would be unclean. But she did touch Jesus, which was odd, to say the least. So she had took a big risk, and it scared her to own up to what she had done because she didn't know Jesus personally. She didn't know if he was going to be mad. She didn't know if, like, this was something that could have gotten her, like, stoned, killed, tortured, all sorts of things, because she was untouchable. But then it says in Mark that she told the whole truth, which means that her affliction was publicly exposed. So, like, if you think about that, if you're, like, somebody that struggles with something, you don't really want people to know that you struggle with it, because then it becomes, like, your whole thing. Like, for example, when I was in high school, I had an eating disorder. I didn't tell people that. You don't want people to know that about you. You don't want people to see you as, oh, that girl that has an eating disorder. You don't want that. She didn't want people to see her as untouchable, unclean. So she probably didn't tell people. She probably told the people closest to her and just stayed away from everybody else, like isolated herself. And so in telling the whole truth, she would have ostracized herself to everybody, telling them what she had suffered for 12 years. And everybody would see her, like, own personal shame, because, like I said, the Pharisees would have taught that this affliction would have come from sin. They would have seen her as a sinful person, not someone that was struggling. And then the interesting thing about Jesus in this story is that after he asked who touched, he looked around, and the woman knew, came and told the whole truth. But he didn't ostracize her further. Like, she already had told her affliction, had told how she had suffered, but he didn't further, like, prod her, say anything that would, like, force her to say anything else. What he simply said was, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from suffering." He gave her a new identity. And that is something that just heals my soul in a way that I cannot explain to you. She was completely restored by the love that she felt from Jesus, because in a community where she was isolated and unwanted, he had her come forward, explain her suffering, and gave her love, not pain, further than what she had already experienced. He called her daughter, which was new for her. Because if you think about it, she would have been isolated from everybody she would have known. If people knew that she had struggled from this, they would have distanced themselves as far as they possibly could from her. And so being called something that is so, like, near and dear to someone's heart must have meant, like, the world to her. And then this is someone okay, quick plug for an Instagram account that I love dearly. Anthony Garola on Instagram, he essentially illustrates Bible passages and speaks a little bit on their stories. He spoke on this one, which is what inspired me to read it in the first place. And the line that he said was, "Her blood spoke shame and his blood spoke her name." Think about that. This woman who bled for 12 years would have been shamed by her community. But Jesus, one that would later go and suffer and die on the cross and bleed out, essentially, would want her and welcome her. It just boggles my mind that, what was considered shameful for her blood, was an act of sacrifice for Jesus. And I just think that's a beautiful thing. But in her restoration, Christ healed not only her body, but also her soul. So it says that her bleeding immediately stopped. But like I said, she got a new identity. She got saved, essentially. We all can be from Jesus. But I did tell you guys that we were going to kind of answer the question, does Jesus still heal today? And I think the answer is absolutely yes. Obviously he healed bodily and physically, and I think that he can still do that, because I feel that in my own personal life I have experienced some of that, which is so cool. He's so cool. I love God. But I also think that the healings that we see most today are in our souls. Just because of think about it. When you're saved, there's something different that just happens to you. Something gets unlocked. There's something that happens in your brain that completely changes the course of your life, and your soul is new. I can't explain it. It's just the thing that you gotta experience, man. It's so cool. But like I said, I feel he feels mostly in the soul, and I find that comes in 3 different ways. In conviction, in prayer, and through loved ones. In convictions, this is something that I think is very true of people. Every once in a while you just get something that is stuck in your brain, or somebody tells you something and you're I should be better. In my life recently, one of the people that I know had a really, really true and painful conviction. He struggled deeply with forgiving people, and he talked to me about this, and he said that I could use it, so don't worry. I did ask first. But he realized he was being very far from Christ-like, and he held grudges because he felt prideful in a way. He felt his forgiveness was too good to give to them. And it took a prodding from the Lord through one of his very close friends, for him to see that was wrong. Jesus freely offers us forgiveness. It says that in the Bible somewhere. I can't remember exactly where, but it does say it. He offers so freely forgiveness, just like he did with this woman. She was prodded to address her own suffering, and through that suffering he forgave her. And he did the same to my friend, because I feel that in addressing what we lack in life, it kind of brings restoration and freedom to our shame, because it allows us to grow into more Christ-like people. It's just interesting the way that God sometimes puts things on our hearts that just absolutely change the course of our lives. So now the person that I know gives freedom, or gives forgiveness very freely, which is very inspiring to see. Just because he realized that Christ gave it to him, so why not give it to other people? And the second way, prayer. This is something that I Fun fact about me, I have not been a Christian very long. I've been a Christian for since 2018, which is not a very long time. I guess now it's a little bit longer than when I first started, but I don't know, it's interesting. I did not really start praying until I got to Grace College, which is a very interesting thing, because as a Christian, as someone that's going into youth ministry, you'd think oh yeah, she prays all the time. No, dude. I was so bad at praying, just because I would forget to do it, I would not prioritize it, I would just ignore it in general, because I didn't realize how vital it was to spiritual health. I had a health scare very recently, and I felt like there was nothing that I could do. It was terrifying for me. I didn't know what to do. I went to doctors, they couldn't give me any answers, and so as my last resort, which should have been my first resort, I started praying. I prayed for healing of my body, but I also prayed for healing of my mind, because like this affliction that I had did something to my brain that I do not understand. Like, I was so anxiety riddled, I just simply could not find peace. Like, I was, like when people get nervous and how they like bounce their legs or like their hands shake all the time, all day, every day. I could not shake this anxiety over what was happening to me, and I didn't know why it was happening or how I could fix it. And so when I got into prayer, I of course prayed that God would heal what was happening, but I also prayed that like he would calm my mind, he would calm my soul, and that's what he did. I spent more time in the Word, and I dove deeply into the Psalms, which, the Psalms are really good if you're struggling with things. But what I found was that like through reaching out, I found healing. And that's what this woman did. She reached out and she touched Jesus. And that's what we do in prayer, in a sense, is you reach out and you open up that line of communication between you and God. And I think it's vital to being a Christian. And then finally, through loved ones, through both of the things I mentioned prior, both my friend and I, we relied on people that God had given us. We relied on each other and friends and other confidants, and that kind of speaks from James 1, where it says, like, every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. God gives us tangible people and like things in our lives that we can rely on to help glorify God. Does that make sense? I mean, like, there's people in your life that are so like godly and so God-focused that they inspire you to go more towards your faith. And I feel like that's a gift from God. And then he also allows people to just like get into your life. They know you, they know what you struggle with, they know where you're at, they know where you're going, and they just give you comfort, because like nobody likes to go through life alone. This woman suffered alone for 12 years. She went through life alone for 12 years. Being alone for like 20 minutes makes me question everything in my life. Like, I don't know, dude. It's just, I don't know. I just think it's so interesting that like our minds are calmed both by God and by the people that he gives us. So in our cases, it could be like friends, family, confidants, but in this woman's case, he gave her Jesus. She was able to reach out and touch the physical God of the universe and was healed in both mind and soul and in body. So 3 things, not just 2. And I just think that's incredible. So in conclusion, Christ healed then, and he heals now. Yes, he can heal physically through weakness and disease. He does, he has, and he will continue to do so. But most importantly, he heals our souls, and he heals our minds. And he gives us new identities rooted in him. He roots us in the truth, which is himself, the way, the truth, and the life. No one goes to the Father except through Christ. So, go ahead. Ta-da! That's it. That's about all I got for you guys. So if you'd like, you can ask questions. If you wouldn't, you can also just not. It's up to you, really.